Hey guys, today we're going to talk a little bit about World War One and some of the new technologies that made it different from any other war that had been fought up to that point. It was a truly global war, and it was the first one that took place in the industrial era. And there were 20 million casualties in this war, guys. And you think that's a lot until World War II came along 30 years later, but the world had never seen anything like this before. So we're going to take a look at some of the new technologies that were employed in that war. Okay. World War I was known for its trench warfare. The two armies found themselves basically suffering so many casualties because a lot of the new weapons were just so efficient at killing people that the tactics just did not match up to them. So basically, both these armies were using Napoleonic warfare tactics. They would stand up, line up against each other, and just start marching at each other. And when people are using machine guns and massive artillery shells, that is not a good tactic in that situation. So that's why a lot of the early days of the war there were so many casualties until these trench systems were devised. And really, both armies would dig these hundreds of mile-long trenches, facing each other from northern France to southern France on the Western Front, anyway. And the soldiers would live in these trenches for the better part of 4 years. So a couple of the new technologies that were used in battle was, on the left there you'll see the machine gun, which I think that's the Vickers gun. That was the British version of the machine gun. These things could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, and when you have guys just walking up to you, you're going to do massive damage. So both sides had them, so they figured out pretty quick that they needed to get some cover, so that's why they dug these massive trenches, so they could get underground and not just be killed mercilessly. The man on the right's wearing a gas mask. Another horrible invention of the war was poison gas, chlorine gas, mustard gas. A lot of these gases would be employed. They would shoot an artillery shell and it would explode and the gas would come out. And it would either burn your skin off when it touched you, the gas, or when you breathed it in, you would choke to death in your own blood. It was very, very horrific. Some of the things we wish that were never invented. The airplane was first used in World War I. It was invented in 1914. This was the first evidence of air warfare. The airplanes would be used for reconnaissance. That would be just like to get an idea of where the enemy was at. They would also be used to drop bombs on the enemy. Of course, the enemy also had airplanes, so this would start the first evidence of what we call dogfighting, which is fighter airplanes fighting with each other, trying to shoot each other down in the skies. So that was the first evidence of this in the world. On the right there, you'll see an early tank, which the tank is really what changed the tide and turned the tide in World War I. The British were the first ones to employ the tank, and what the tank did was allow people to come up out of the trenches and start making some progress forward without getting killed instantly as soon as they put their head above the trench. So, yeah, the tanks really turned the tide in World War I. In World War II, they'd be used to devastating effect. We'll talk about that later on, but yeah, tanks were in their infancy in World War I, toward the end of the war, though. That's what really ended the trench warfare stalemate. Okay, finally, it wasn't all just death and destruction. Transportation and canned goods. Trucks were employed for the first time in warfare history, in World War I, on a mass scale anyway. You got to get your troops places, right? Trains also. Europe had massive railway networks, and both sides used those to move their troops around and to get supplies to them. And on the left there, you'll see this was the first really mass scale use of canned goods to feed troops and other supplies as well. Yeah, World War I, guys, was the first really industrial world wars. So a lot of the things we're accustomed to now really got their start in World War One. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more later on.